Not just emotionally, but in every single way imaginable. Financially, mentally, physically, spiritually. Moments where you look around and you cannot find a single reason to keep going. Where the weight of everything you've lost becomes so heavy that even breathing feels like too much effort. Sarah Mitchell knew those moments well. She had lived inside them for 3 long, painful years. And if you had seen her in the winter of 2018, sitting alone on the floor of an empty apartment in Manchester, England, you would have never believed what she would become just 2 years later. But that is exactly the power of the human spirit. When everything is stripped away, what remains is the truest version of who you are. Sarah grew up in a small working-class family in Leeds, Yorkshire. Her father worked long shifts at a textile factory. Her mother cleaned offices in the early mornings before coming home to cook and care for 3 children. They didn't have much, but they had love, they had dignity. And they had a rule in their household that Sarah never forgot. Her father used to say, "Sarah, we may be poor in pocket, but we are never poor in spirit." You remember that? She carried those words like a lantern through every dark corridor of her life. Growing up, Sarah was the kid who stayed after school to help the teacher. She volunteered on weekends at the local shelter. She wrote in her journal every night before bed, filling pages with dreams that felt too big for the small town she came from. She dreamed of something greater, she just didn't know yet what that would cost her. At 22, Sarah got a scholarship to study psychology at the University of Manchester. It was the proudest day of her family's life. Her mother cried at the kitchen table when the acceptance letter arrived. Her father, a quiet man who rarely showed emotion, held Sarah's hand for a long moment and simply said, "Go and be great." Sarah threw herself into her studies with everything she had. She graduated with honors, landed a job as a youth counselor at a community center in the city, fell in love with a man named Daniel who played guitar and laughed easily and made her feel like the world was full of possibility. By 29, Sarah had built a beautiful life. A career she loved, a relationship that felt solid, an apartment they shared together, a future that looked bright and full and certain. She had no idea that in just a few months, all of it would be gone. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in February. Daniel was driving to a job interview when a truck ran a red light and hit his car on the driver's side. He survived, but just barely. The accident left Daniel with a traumatic brain injury. He couldn't work, couldn't drive. Some mornings he couldn't remember her name. Sarah's entire world shifted in a single phone call. She became his caregiver overnight. She reduced her work hours to part-time to be with him. She spent her savings on medical bills. She watched the man she loved slowly become someone she barely recognized. The grief of loving someone who is still alive but deeply changed, that is one of the most invisible forms of suffering there is. And Sarah carried it silently. Because that's what she had always done, she carried things silently until she couldn't anymore. 18 months after the accident, Daniel's family made the decision to move him back to his hometown in Scotland for full-time care. They didn't ask Sarah. They didn't consult her. They simply called one evening and said it had been decided. She drove to the hospital the next morning, sat beside his bed, held his hand. He looked at her and smiled, that same warm smile she had fallen in love with years ago. And then he said, "You've been so good to me. But you need to go live your life now." She didn't know if he fully understood what was happening, but those words, she heard them clearly. She kissed his forehead, walked out of that hospital, sat in her car in the parking lot for 45 minutes, and then she drove home to an apartment that suddenly felt like a stranger's house. The next few months were the darkest of Sarah's life. She had lost her relationship. She had depleted her savings. She had reduced her hours at work so significantly that her manager eventually let her go. She was 31 years old. Living off the last few £100s in her account, eating instant noodles, not answering her phone, she stopped writing in her journal, stopped going outside, stopped caring about almost everything. Her mother called every single day, sometimes twice. Sarah would let the calls go to voicemail and listen to them later in the dark. Her mother's voice soft and steady and full of love she wasn't ready to receive yet. One night she pulled out her old journals from university. She sat on the floor surrounded by all those pages filled with her younger self's dreams. She read them for hours. And somewhere between the grief and the silence, something very small and very stubborn began to stir inside her. It started with just one decision. Sarah decided to get dressed in the morning. That's it, that was the whole plan, just get dressed, get up, put clothes on, go outside for 10 minutes. It sounds small, but when you are at rock bottom, small is everything. The first week was hard. The second week was slightly less hard. By the third week, she was walking to the park near her apartment every morning, sitting on the same bench, watching people pass by. She noticed things: a father teaching his daughter to ride a bike, an old woman feeding pigeons with a smile like she had nowhere else in the world to be, two teenagers laughing at something on a phone. Life continuing, ordinary and unstoppable. She started writing again, just small things at first, what she saw at the park, what she felt, what she was afraid of, and then one morning she wrote something that changed everything. She wrote, "What if this isn't the end? What if this is just the part of the story before it gets good?" Sarah remembered something from her psychology training. Her professor had once said that the most resilient people are not those who never fall apart, but those who find a reason to reassemble themselves. She began to think about what she still had. She had her education, she had her experience working with young people in crisis, she had her empathy earned through genuine suffering, she had her voice. And she had something she hadn't recognized as valuable until now. She had lived through something real, something that had tested her to her absolute core. She began volunteering at a women's crisis center in Manchester just 2 mornings a week. She wasn't ready for full-time work, but she needed purpose. She needed to feel like she still had something to give. The first day she walked in, a young woman barely 20 years old looked at her and said, "Have you ever been through something really bad?" Sarah sat down. And for the first time in a long time, she told the truth. "Yes," she said, "and I'm still here." Word spread about Sarah at the center, not because she was the most qualified, not because she had the best credentials, but because she was real. She didn't talk at the women who came in broken and afraid. She sat with them, she listened. She shared her own story without shame or performance. She had a gift, and she had always had it, but pain had sharpened it into something extraordinary. Within 6 months, the director of the center offered her a full-time position as lead counselor. Within a year, she was running workshops for women recovering from loss, trauma, and life transitions. Within 18 months, she had designed a peer support program that was adopted by 3 additional centers across the north of England. Her mother called her one Sunday afternoon and said, "Your father would be so proud of you, love." Sarah's father had passed away the previous year. She had carried that loss too quietly, the way she carried everything. But that afternoon she allowed herself to feel proud, just for a moment. At 34, Sarah stood on a stage in London at a national mental health conference. She had been invited to speak about resilience, not from a textbook, but from lived experience. 500 people sat in that auditorium. She walked up to the podium, looked out at the audience, took a long, slow breath, and then she said something that silenced the entire room. 3 years ago, I was sitting on the floor of an empty apartment, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to imagine that my life could ever mean anything again. Today I am standing here telling you that the floor is not the end. Sometimes the floor is exactly where you need to be. Because it is the only place where you finally stop falling and start deciding who you are going to become. The room was completely still, and then it erupted. Here is what I want you to understand about Sarah Mitchell's story. She did not recover because she was extraordinary. She did not rebuild because she had resources others didn't have. She did not rise because the world gave her an easy road. She recovered because she made one small decision at a time. Get dressed, go outside, sit on the bench, watch life continue. Write one sentence, volunteer for 2 mornings, tell the truth to one person, one small act of courage, then another, then another. Resilience is not a personality trait you are born with or without. It is a practice. It is a choice that you make not once but every single morning when you open your eyes and the weight of everything is still sitting on your chest. You choose anyway. That is what Sarah did, and it changed everything. Today, Sarah runs a nonprofit organization that supports women going through major life transitions: divorce, bereavement, job loss, health crises, relationship breakdowns. She has a team of 18 people. She has helped over 4,000 women across the United Kingdom rebuild their lives. She got remarried 2 years ago to a man named James who she met at a community event. He is calm and kind and makes her laugh every single day. She has a daughter now, 14 months old. She named her Grace, and every morning before the household wakes up, Sarah sits in the kitchen with a cup of tea and her journal, still writing, still dreaming, still filling pages. On the first page of every new journal she opens, she writes the same sentence she has written since she was a little girl in lids, dreaming of something greater. I may be poor in pocket, but I am never poor in spirit. Her father's words still carrying her forward. I want to speak directly to you right now. Maybe you are going through something that feels impossible. Maybe you have lost something or someone, and you genuinely cannot see how life can be good again. Maybe you feel like the best parts of your story are already behind you. I want you to hear this clearly. They are not. The hardest chapters of our lives are not proof that we have failed. They are proof that we are in the middle of something, not at the end of it. Sarah Mitchell sat on the floor of an empty apartment at 31 years old and thought her story was over. She was wrong. And if you are feeling that way right now, you are wrong too. Your story is not over. It is just getting to the part where it becomes worth telling. If this story touched your heart today, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed to Grace Talk TV yet, hit that subscribe button right now. Because every single week, we bring you stories like this one. Stories of real people who refuse to give up. Stories that will remind you, no matter what you are going through, that you have what it takes. We will see you in the next story.